Welcome to the third and final segment on fall protection. So this is fall protection part 3. I'm Markus Wesaw, and as always my information is listed clearly on the screen, so if you have any questions feel free to call or email at your discretion. And the objectives on this lesson, as well as those contained in part 1 and part 2, are all the same. If you'd like to review those again, just hit pause and go ahead and give that a look through if you need a quick refresher on what we aim to accomplish here. Let's go ahead and proceed with fall protection. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over different types of work in terms of different industries, such as construction, such as maritime, not necessarily because you are in any one of these particular industries, but rather so you can get a full scale understanding of fall protection across all industries. And so what I'd like to do is just survey this and introduce you to the many ways that people get hurt from falls and why we have these requirements in place. And so there's some visual aids here, as you can see with these photographs. And so roofing work and leading edge work is going to be a 10-foot requirement, and that arises from the construction industry. So employees engaged in leading edge work and general roofing work must be protected by fall restraint, fall arrest systems, or positioning devices when they are exposed to falls greater than 10 feet or more in height. And so again, you see the three categories of fall protection there, and you can see how people working on different pitches of roofs or the steepness really of a roof can have quite the exposure to a potential fall hazard. In the construction industry, we look at steel erection, and the federal OSHA guidelines are actually interesting here because if you look at steel erection for connecting and decking, the requirement's 30 feet, and this means that up to 30 feet an employee can do connecting and decking work on steel erection, basically bolting and connecting steel beams to build some kind of steel structure. Typically they're skyscrapers or big warehouse buildings, but they don't even need they don't even have to tie off and use a fall protection until 30 feet. And then they only have to have the means to tie off in addition to that. So what's interesting is that they have to have the means to tie off, so they have to wear a harness and they have to have some kind of lanyard to tie off to, but they don't have to be tied off. However, I'm going to make a professional recommendation, and I'm going to recommend that anytime someone's involved in any kind of steel erection work, we look at implementing fall protection at 10 feet. And there are many ways to do this. There are many ways to accomplish fall protection for steel erection. We have beam clamps, or what we call beamers and such. So if you want more information about that, or if that's interesting to you, if you see that kind of work going on, feel free to call me or email me. We can discuss it further. Scaffolding is interesting because scaffolding requires the use of cross braces typically, or another type of fall arrest system. So instead of guardrails on scaffolding, a lot of times in the construction industry or even in general industry, what we'll do is we'll just put two beams. They look like X's. You can see it in the bottom right hand corner there in that scaffolding diagram. But what you see is the cross brace. And the cross brace, we want to get the intersection to about 42 inches. And there's some leeway. I think we got 38 inches to 45 inches, or roughly within that height. That's where we want to put the cross brace in the center of the intersection. So keep that in mind. So at 10 feet or less, there's no fall protection required. Ladders. This is a pretty simple one. When an employee is working on a ladder over 25 feet long or 25 feet in height, however you want to look at it, and doing work with both hands, okay? So they're doing some type of work that requires the use of both hands. They can't get that 3 points of contact that we really strive for. Then what we require is a safety belt or lanyard to be used in conjunction with the ladder. and that really serves as that third point of contact. And so that really helps an employee stay on the ladder and work a little bit more safely. In longshoring and stevedoring, again going back to the maritime OSHA regulations, we have an 8-foot standard. So longshoring or stevedoring requires maintenance on cranes or spouts or similar types of equipment. We have an 8-foot fall protection standard there whenever an employee can fall at that distance or greater. And so typically we like to see a full body harness there and some type of lanyard attached to the structure or to some other anchor point. Construction work, again, as we mentioned in some of the other modules, is going to require a 6-foot standard for fall protection. So generally speaking, anytime an employee working in construction has the potential to fall more than 6 feet, then we look at some kind of fall arrest system, safety net system, or positioning device system. And so please remember that construction is defined as construction, alteration, and or repair, including painting and decoration. And so if you're painting or whatever, or doing some decoration like hanging up some photos or hanging up some artwork or something like that, that technically is construction work, we have a 6-foot height requirement. Shipbuilding and ship repairing, again, if you're doing any work in the petrochemical industry, or you end up working offshore on an oil rig or something like that, some of these maritime regulations are going to apply in those particular industries. And so it's always good to just be aware that there are different height requirements for different industries. And so for shipbuilding and ship repair, employees exposed to unguarded edges of decks or platforms, flats, or similar flat surfaces more than 5 feet above a solid surface, the edges must be guarded by an adequate guardrail, and the standard there is 5 feet. So in this particular instance, in shipbuilding and ship repair, 5 feet or higher, we need to look at some type of fall protection system. There are some cases where fall protection is almost always required. And so what I'd like to do is just go over a few examples with you when fall protection is always required. So regardless of height, all open-sided floors, walkways, platforms, or runways above or adjacent to dangerous equipment, pickling or galvanized tanks, degreasing units, or similar hazardous equipment must be guarded with a standard railing and a tow board. And this is true across many industries, such as the general industry, in agriculture, and in construction. Tree trimming, if you're ever involved in this, whether it's outside of the office, you know, we have an employee go out there and work on trimming some trees just as a collateral duty or just because it needs to get done. Remember that we have that employer-employee relationship, so the OSHA regulations come into play. So anytime there's tree trimming, fall protection is always required. Warehouse order pickers. So if you ever are in or working on a warehouse at some point and you're in one of those order pickers, it's just a little forklift that, as you can see here, the employee raises with the mast of the forklift. And so anytime that you're in this situation, you always have to be tied off. And this is a pretty simple solution. Usually there's a full body harness there, and then you tie off right there above the mast, as you can see in both of these photographs. Moving forward, window washing. It's kind of amazing how high window washers go. And these guys will go all the way up on skyscrapers, and smaller buildings, of course, seem to be less of an issue. But anytime that somebody's washing windows, whether they are contracted to work for your company or you're going to be involved in the window washing directly, you want to make sure that you're tied off and have some kind of fall protection system in place. One key note, however, is that you want to have a fall arrest system that is connected not to the platform that you're working on. So you want to be anchored off to a different system or a different anchor point, not connected to the platform that you may be using to go up and down on. Elevated work platforms are what we also call aerial work platforms. This would include your scissor lifts, your boom lifts. Some people just call them JLGs because it's a famous brand, or Genie is another one. And so most of your manufacturers, especially JLG and Genie, are going to require or strongly recommend that employees wear a full body harness and tie off into the man basket. Usually there are eye hooks or some kind of eye hole tie off anchor point inside the basket. Now this is tricky because not all manufacturers require that employees tie off in the man basket. Okay, it's not an OSHA regulation, but OSHA will look at the manufacturer's written recommendations, and if the manufacturer says that employees should be tied off inside the man basket, then OSHA will cite you under the general duty clause, the catch-all OSHA citation. And so be aware of that and double check that. And again, this is my own recommendation. Call me if we need to discuss it more, but in certain situations it makes more sense to wear a shock absorbing lanyard, especially if you're working at great heights with these aerial work platforms. And in other cases it makes sense to just wear an ordinary lanyard that does not have shock absorbing properties to it. So that can get tricky, so if you want to talk about that more, please let me know. Whenever there are skylights, and you'll see skylights on the roofs of buildings, and people do fall through these skylights quite frequently, or whenever there's an open staircase, as you can see in the bottom right hand corner. We need to have fall protection, and typically what we like to do is just put a guardrail system up or some kind of guard that can support at least a couple 100 pounds in order to prevent employees from falling over or tripping in some way and going through and getting injured. So now what I'd like to do is have a little fun and just show you some of the things that we see in industry. A lot of people say, well, I got fall protection down, I have it, but it's a very common way that people get injured, and it's one of the primary means of death for workers all across the country. So whenever we look at OSHA fatalities, one of the first questions is, was it related to a fall or electricity? Because those are the two largest categories. So in this particular photograph, we see two individuals. There looks like three there, and they're working at a height, and they just climbed up on the structure there, and they're doing their work with no fall protection. Okay, so these employees are facing a significant hazard there. Here we have a construction worker with an obvious potential to fall more than 6 feet, and that would be the hazard there. And this is so common it's not even funny, but I just wanted to show you this photograph to point that out, that this individual employee should have some kind of fall protection, like probably restraint would work best. This one's a little harder to see, so I apologize for that. You may need to go to full screen mode in order to see this picture in better detail. But what we have is we have two employees working on a very high structure on a roof, and they have great potential to fall there, and they have absolutely no protection. And if you've ever been up on a roof like this, those metal roofs, they can be quite slippery, and so there's quite a bit of danger there. In this particular picture, we see that employees have the potential to fall through because we don't have the standard guardrail system. And just to give you a quick recap on the standard guardrail system, the top rail must be 42 inches in height. Then we have that middle rail, or we call it the mid rail. We have a range on that. We usually like to see about 20 to 22 inches there. And then a toe board that's going to be flush with the walking working surface, and usually that's about 4 inches in height, and that goes across the bottom, and that's to prevent overhead fallen objects from striking workers below. Moving on here, we see scaffolding obviously greater than 10 feet. And another hazard that we see here is that we see the employees have stacked way too many cinder blocks up on the scaffolding. So that's a fall hazard too, because when we overload the capabilities of the scaffolding, we have the potential to have an accident as well. And so let's move on to the last and final picture. These guys look very, very curious about why someone's taking a photograph of them, so that's kind of humorous there. But more to the point, I want to drive home a message here. So you see this individual wearing the orange shirt, and you can obviously see that he is wearing a fall protection full body harness, yet is not tied off. And so to the left we see some scaffolding there, and we see that there's a lot of things to fall on, and we have no means of protection. And the employee to the right is absolutely wearing no fall protection. And so don't be one of those guys that falls and has an injury while they have a fall protection harness on, because that's just silly. It happens frequently. And so just because you wear a fall protection harness, it's meaningless without properly tying off. And so that will conclude this presentation and the module on fall protection, parts 1 through 3. And as always, if you have any questions at all about any of this, there's a lot more depth that we can go into with respect to this subject matter, but this should be a good overview for you, a good introduction to all the regulatory standards. So if you need more information, I'm here. Feel free to call me or email me. Have a great day.